Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us all this morning. Just taking a second, when we thought about this session, a lot has changed the last couple of years, and each piece of that workflow has changed a little bit differently. So we thought if we brought together publisher, librarian, vendor, we could kind of piece together some of the change. We're really hoping for a lot of dialogue towards the end with the question and answers, so please write stuff down, think of it. We think this will engender some lively conversation. So my name is John Owa. I am the Director of Strategy for the Books program at EBSCO, which encompasses Gobi and EBSCO ebooks. My background, training, education, job history is as an academic librarian. So that's the perspective I bring working through this. What I'm going to share with you today is kind of some high-level macro data about the trends that we've seen in the book industry. Now, Gobi isn't the whole academic book industry, but we have a pretty good view, and the data set we have is large enough to be meaningful, and we can make some inferences off that data. If you're not familiar with Gobi, Gobi sells books to academic libraries, print books and ebooks. We have about 14 million print books we sell, and we have about 30 ebook platforms we work with. We bring those together for over 6,000 libraries, and we have over 16,000 active librarian users. And really the way we do that is we enhance the metadata around individual titles, what we consider kind of the corpus of academic content published in the English language each year, which is between 65 and 70,000 titles a year. Then we take the metadata, we associate it with those books, and we use that metadata in a decision engine to push recommendations out to libraries, and also push books automatically to libraries. Before I get into the data, I wanted to use this slide, and it's from the OA ebook Data Trust Initiative. It was commissioned by them, and it was done by Esposito and Clark, Laura Ricci. And I love this slide because very often when talking with libraries and publishers, there's a comment around the black box of what happens when a book goes from publishing to library, right? What is all the stuff that goes on? We know there's a lot of stuff. And this does such an articulate way of showing it, because there's so many pieces, there's so much to this workflow that none of us could do this without each other, right? The librarian is focused on the end user, but they also have authors as patrons. So they're at the front and back of this entire thing. The ILS is in here, right? The discovery service, all this stuff that libraries are very focused on. The publisher, particularly one like Lisa who has their own platform, she's dealing with authors all the time, but also the end users. How do they interact with their platform, right? How does she get her information into the knowledge base? And then ourselves, we're in there, right in the middle of that, working with distributors, right? How do we get those data feeds? Is it BiblioVault? Is it Lightning Source, right? We need all that information to make those books discoverable. So I really think this slide in particular does a great job of just showing there's so many pieces and there's so many different perspectives here. We're only going to give you 3 small ones, but I think it will be interesting. So the first place to start for me is always what's available. You can't action anything unless it's there. So what this slide does is this looks at the amount of books that we profile each year, again, 65 to 70,000 titles that we think is the meaningful academic corpus. What is available digitally at that time of profiling? So basically, what is available simultaneously and print and ebooks? Unsurprisingly, there's going to be a correlation between more digital availability simultaneously and the increase in digital purchasing. And you can see over time, there's been a sustained effort by publishers to shrink that gap. And one of the most interesting trends we're seeing is the gap is now starting to go in the other direction. We're seeing some publishers publish the ebook 30, 60, 90 days in advance of print. So we're really kind of seeing a shift in how the formats work. But right now we're seeing 78%. So that means there's still 22% of content that we consider the academic corpus that is not available in digital, right? So print, we still need it. It's still critically important. There's still a lot of subject areas that are buttressed by it. The other piece of availability is model availability. So the column under print, that shows everything that's available in print, because pretty much everyone we work with the exception of one very small publisher who's digital only, has print available. The next looks at what is available digitally at time of release. That was the slide that we just showed. The third column, that's what's DRM free. And you can see over time we've seen significant growth in what is available DRM free. Right? It was 30% and less a few years ago. more than half of the digital content that we're looking at is now available to DRM-free. Same goes for DDA. DDA was a very small pool a few years ago. We always talk about DDA being very comprehensive, right? You can add a lot of content in DDA. The reality was you couldn't, right? Only 30% of what was available in digital, right? So think about it. It's not even the whole pool. It's 30% of what was available digitally is there. So we have a nice increase in DDA. STL has also went up. It went up at the same time that DDA did. And then the piece that's really interesting to me is EBA. We've seen significant growth in EBA offerings, and now almost half of what we offer is available in EBA. So now into some more of the trends. So that talked about what was available, right? What could be purchased, what could be acquired. Now we're going to look at what actually was. Clear shift here, clear market shift. But the key thing here to me is this trend existed before COVID. We were heading digital before COVID. COVID just accelerated that trend. And you can see it spiked in 21 with 67% of the revenue that flowed through Gobi was generated off digital works. That held pretty steady this past fiscal year. And just for everyone's case, our fiscal year runs from July through June. So that's what most of this data is based off of. This last FY, 66%. So really very little drop off in the ebook acquisition. So we have now, as an industry, really made the shift to a digital-first mentality. That's what we've seen. That's where the trend was heading. We jumped forward a couple of years because of the pandemic, but that's where we're at now. This next piece is going to look at ebook sales by access model. And what we've seen is really a consolidation in the access models. I know there's a lot of stuff like model fatigue, that's real. But we're seeing it really distill into two channels. So 57% of all digital acquisition that flows through Gobi is done in the unlimited user model. Most of that is DRM free as well. So overwhelmingly, you can see the growth. As it became available in unlimited user, as it became available DRM free, that acquisition model took off, and the majority of acquisition is taking place in that model today. And we expect that to continue to grow. What that has done is caused some other models to contract, right? The nonlinear lending or the concurrent access model, right, NLL, CAM, that has really kind of become a niche model. We don't see a lot of acquisition comprehensively of that. STL is another one that has really fallen off quite a bit during this time. 3 users, very interesting, and there's a slide coming up that we'll get some conversation going there. But 3 users are very niche acquisition now, because where 3 users getting used is if the book is not unlimited user, but we need more access than 1 user, that's when 3 user gets purchased. And 1 user has seen a little bit of reduction, but there's a lot of books that are only available 1 user. Every trade house basically is going to have only 1 user access for the most part. So if we're talking about a nonfiction trade book, it's going to come in 1 user. And also 1 user is typically the cheapest price available, and that still plays a big role. I'm going to end with this slide just very quickly. This is always an interesting one. What this looks like is the average price a customer pays for content. So we look at everything that is bought by a customer, and we put an average on it. The average price that a customer spends in a print book is $53. This is crazy when you think about this, because 3 years ago, the average price for a print book was $93. Last year it was $63. This past year it was $53. We've seen a significant behavior change. The 1 user has been pretty stable. 3 user, I said there was a slide where we talk about this. You can see it's more than unlimited user. That does not make sense at first, but think about it. No textbooks are available on limited user for the most part. More expensive content, more unique content is typically available through user. That's why we're seeing the higher average price to customer on that. And then the unlimited user price seems to fall right in there. And then as we talked about, nonlinear lending and STL has fallen off. So that's my time. I'm going to pass things over to Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Noctegal. I am the Director of Institutional Resellers and Global Strategy, Channel Strategy at Oxford University Press. And I'm going to just give you a little bit of perspective of what we as a publisher were experiencing in the midst of some of the changes that John took us through. As I was thinking about my comments for this presentation, I thought, I haven't been here in 3 years. Let's see what was going on 3 years ago. And I was starting to look through the program, and words like the evolution of collection development and transformation and re-envisioning of book collections. And I was scrolling through the program, and I noticed a session given by Hope Lejeune from Lone Star College outside of Houston. And her talk was titled, How to Build a Library Collection After a Natural Disaster. And that one kind of stopped me in my tracks. Of course, she was talking about rebuilding her library after Hurricane Harvey. But here we are 3 years later, and I think we can somewhat agree, without getting too political about it, that there was a natural disaster that we sort of experienced over these last 3 years. And so what was kind of a transformation and evolution, very kind of gentle evolving, all of a sudden was disrupted. And so I started to think about how this disruption really required us to accelerate any of the trends that John sort of took us through, that we sort of started to see happen, but all of a sudden we were in this state of disruption caused by this, by the pandemic. So in this acceleration, we knew that we as a publisher needed to really change our pace of change, which frankly was kind of out of character for most scholarly publishers. For those of us in the audience, we like to be fairly circumspect about certain things that we do. We had no time for this, right? Our speed of change, our rate of change needed to happen now. And I think as John showed in these numbers, we saw how you needed to respond, and we needed to be right there next to you. In 2019, digital sales accounted for 31% of OUP's sales through Gobi. That peaked at 66 in 2021, sort of in line with what John showed us. And now we're at about 58% of all sales through Gobi being digital. We know that our approval plans changed from being 60% of our Gobi, 66% of our Gobi business, that's print and digital combined, falling down to 55% last year. And again, showing the shifts, with the shifts that John showed us, where firm ordering, collection, and EVA has really replaced some of that activity. But we didn't know all that when we came to the office in March, the end of March in 2020, or we got on the phone in March of 2020 and said, oh my gosh, what are we doing? Your books were all behind locked doors. Even when you started to go in, you had limited staff, maybe standing outside on the sidewalk, delivering a book to a faculty or student member. And faculty were reaching out to us to find out if ebooks were available, and we were like, call your library. And it was this kind of, oh, now faculty are discovering that their libraries actually have resources for them to use. This is going to be a good outcome. So what did we do as a sort of publisher sitting in New York City and Oxford in the UK? We put in place 2 specific programs to really drive this acceleration. One immediate thing that we did was we really convened a triage team of colleagues sort of across the business to respond to all of the incoming that we were getting. Faculty members, as I said, calling their editors, calling us, just shooting out an email onto social, like, where do I get this? So we really were getting queries about availability. I need these books. Do you have it? Which platforms can I get it on? So we had a triage team that was really trying to prioritize these incoming requests and action as many as we could. But we also, importantly, and what I want to talk a little bit more about today, is we developed a product acceleration program that really directed resource internally, that redeployed staff from across the business to come up with ways for us to really respond to this immediate need that we had coming out of our library customers. So from those conversations, we initiated several specific actions. Number one, and as John was showing, we just pushed more of our content online. We made sure that it was available on as many of the platforms that you were going to, whereas perhaps previously, in February of 2020, we were being more, and I'll use air quotes, strategic about which content we put where, knowing that we had our own platforms and obviously we want to see your usage through our platforms. But that was no longer going to fly, right? You needed to have the content where you and your patrons were already going.
Yes, thank you.
Oh.
I know, no, really, I mean.
Thank you, you're welcome.
Yes.
Glad we did that. We also worked with you on making sure that you were unlocking those print holdings, that you had digital access to all of those books that you had already purchased. And we did that not only through campaigns for our direct platform sales, many of you probably participated in our Clear Your Shelves programs, but we also made sure that we were working through the aggregators on their P2E transition programs, because knowing that many of you have the restricted resources and in fact have non-duplication policies, you still needed to get those books that nobody was accessing. We also expanded the availability of more content through more sales models. John showed us the increase in UU availability. That, it's like, I'm glad I wasn't the only one, right? Again, because we had this strategy of slightly preferencing our own platform, a lot of our content was only available through aggregators on the 1U and 3U models. In fact, a lot of the content through some of our own products was available through these limited models. So we just opened it up. Everything available anywhere through all models. And it was, in fact, a good business decision, but it also allowed you to get the access that you needed. And that was really where we started to see the EBA picking up and, obviously the drive for DRM free. But knowing that we also needed to support your TPD purchasing because you were getting faculty requests, that's where we saw those firm orders starting to increase, and allowing for that expanded, all models, all content, all platforms. We also started to see the shifts in some of the conversations we were having, certainly with our large consortium partners, on what they were looking for in their licenses for the sharing and collaborative purchasing. So we started to work into some of those larger agreements, the idea of shared collection purchasing and ebook ILL. And if you'd like to learn more about ebook ILL, come to my presentation this afternoon. But I think also importantly, we accelerated the plans we had to migrate our core book product onto Oxford Academic. And that's where the user experience was really facilitated through having all of our core research content, our journals and our books on that single platform. And I think happily, most of you had a good experience in that migration, and we'll continue to see more content going onto that platform. So as we accelerated our product delivery, it meant a lot of digitization, again, sort of borne out by the data that John was showing us. And we started, we were changing our models. So Oxford Handbook Online was a product that had only been available based on an article release schedule. And we said, yeah, that's got to be title by title. We also knew that we had 3 core series, 2 core series that were not yet available, that we sort of jumped into action and digitized those and put those out really in record pace. The Oxford World's Classics, where we released an 18th and 19th century novels, modules, and continue to release the front list in those 2 areas, and we'll also now be releasing an early 20th century literature module in the coming year. And we released the full series of What Everyone Needs to Know, again with an ongoing front list. So, those were not on the immediate horizon, and within sort of a matter of 18 months, those products were released to market. That's a pace of that's a rate of acceleration that you do not, this is the little secret, you do not see that kind of activity from a scholarly press. So that really, in a way, thinking about what has changed for us as publishers, it's not just the business of what we bring out to the market, but it's now also the way we look at the way we work internally. And that expectation of how quickly we need to get things done, how quickly we need to respond to your needs, I think has really embedded and sort of lifted the base level of our understanding of the importance of that acceleration. That was an aside. We also released 7 new OSO modules, so again, expanding the availability of the content through the products that we already have available through you. And we did a very large backlist digitization project for a release that will be coming over the next year. But going back, and it'll be interesting to see John's data in a year from now, as more and more publishers are putting out more backlist to help feed your discovery and your EBA programs, but also just to increase that availability generally. So, what this all gave us, and this isn't a great visual, so apologies for that. But these activities came together in my mind as our gears of change. These are the elements that we put together to help respond. Oh, okay. Happy Halloween. These are that's for me the visual that came together to help push this acceleration. We knew we needed to expand that catalog of content. Imagine it in your brain. There was a catalog of content. That catalog of content needed to equally go to our platforms and to the aggregator platforms, all supported by the same sales models to allow you the option of choosing the content on your platform of choice in the models that work for your budgets and your users to really support your communities. And with that, I thank you, and I'm going to now pass this over to Moon, who is with us there.
Hi, hope everyone can hear me. My name is Moon Kim, Acquisitions Librarian at the Ohio State University. Now I'll share what largely has happened at OSU with, oh, it's a different slide. Okay, sorry, we made some adjustments to our slide deck. Okay, so now I'll share what largely has happened at OSU with our monographs collecting in recent years. So Ohio State is a public land grant or land grant university, also seed grant and space grant, and our enrollment is about nearly 70,000 students. Next slide. And this one just kind of basically goes over the library stats, and our materials budget is, I think this must be an older iteration of our slide deck, but our materials budget is actually at $14.8 million now. Next slide. So basically our library's overall budget is about almost nearly 40 million. It says 36 there, but it's actually 38 point something. And currently our collections budget is at 14.8, and therefore the pie chart is a little bit off as well, but our, in the overall library's budget, the collections budget is about 38%. Next slide. Oh, this is yeah, let's skip this one too. Hold on, let's go back one. Sorry, John. So I did have a slide where I talked about, I was going to talk a little bit about our consortial partnerships, and I'll just say that, you know, libraries, we do not live in silos, and at OSU we are a part of two dynamic consortia partnerships when it comes to our collections, which is Ohio Link and the Big Ten, which really allows us to leverage our savings for a variety of, you know, content for our users. And when we look at our spend with various vendors, including our consortia, we spend a lot with with Ohio Link, which is one of our major consortia, and next I think would be Gobi, and then I think it's Big Ten, and then it would be Oxford University Press. So we anticipate closer collaborative collection development partnerships moving forward. So let's go on to the next slide. Okay, let's keep it there for now. So in terms of our monographs collection strategy, we provide as many avenues for access to content with the exception of a North American English language approval plan, which at OSU, I believe, got discontinued in 2008. So we activate, acquisition methods such as firm orders, DDA, EBA, approval plans, standing orders, subscriptions, etc., to purchase, license, and facilitate access to print, ebooks, ebook packages, and ebook platforms. So we engage in activities that grow our collections through gifts, deposits, and exchanges, which we won't really talk about today. Although we haven't had an English language auto ship approval plan since 2008, we do have 21 other approval plans that are predominantly supplied by foreign vendors in foreign languages, which really support our collections bibliodiversity efforts because sometimes the content is only available in print. And even during the pandemic shutdowns, although there was a 5-month period where we were not physically on site, at OSU we did not stop collecting print, and you'll see that reflected in a little bit when I share our data during that time period. Now I'm wondering if you're gonna see that data, because this is an older slide deck, but John will show it, but I'll kind of correct where it is. So we also have funds for robust selection, such as ILL requests we purchase instead of borrow, or user request process to fill in the user gaps. So let's just see where, John, I'm really sorry, but would you mind advancing one slide? I just want to see which one this is. Okay, let's go back one. So I'm going to skip some things about our user requests, but so I'll skip all of that. So I'll kind of talk a little bit about growth in terms of, through demand. So one of the biggest changes for us at OSU, which the pandemic has greatly accelerated with monographs, was the implementation of our Taylor & Francis evidence-based acquisitions program in 2021. So we had a very active DDA program where a pool of ebooks are made available for discovery and we purchase a title once it is used. We had the DDA program at OSU libraries with ProQuest and Gobi since 2009, which is probably not a coincidence, especially since our North American English language approval plan, auto-ship plan, got discontinued in 2008. So largely from fiscal year 2017 through 2020, and if you see me looking to the side, it's because I'm actually trying to pull up our numbers. In fiscal year 2017, our DDA spend was $226,642.23. By fiscal year 2020, that number has essentially more than doubled to $519,961.60. So, of course, we all know what happened in March of 2020, and during the financial austerity measures of 2020, our collection strategist, Gene Springs, and I began exploring the Taylor & Francis evidence-based acquisitions model to control our runaway DDA costs, and the DDA data was the basis for our shift to the EBA. So, John, would you advance one? I just want to see what the next slide is.
I'm going to try to pull up the other slides real quick, Moon. You give me one second.
So I'll just kind of talk about our DDA and EBA. So unlike the existing DDA program where our users have immediate access to the ebook but trigger purchases based on their engagement with the title, such as through downloads and views, The EBA provides immediate access to the titles in the EBA, but the purchasing happened based on different data points. So, usage data, and at OSU we also consider request data, so if a selector selected a title. So for several fiscal years, we noticed significant increases of the Taylor and Francis imprints, especially the Routledge content, getting triggered in our DDA program. So for example, we spent, okay, now
We've got the right
let's
debt
skip that one. So that's our runaway DDA. So if you look at the fiscal year 2017 through fiscal year 2020, you'll see our numbers really drastically jumped. And you'll also notice that in fiscal year 2021, it starts to stabilize because that we implemented our Taylor and Francis EBA in January of 2021, so that there's a big shift from our DDA expenditures in fiscal year 2020 to fiscal year 2021. So we ended up with a more controlled annual EBA spend of $115,000 for fiscal year 2021 and fiscal year 2022. So let's see, next slide, great. So although I'm mostly focusing on the financial components today, there was a clear demand for the content. So 2 years later, we are spending significantly less money on the DDA, indicating the move to the EBA has been effective. We still run the DDA program in conjunction with our EBA, but the costs are just much more manageable than before. So next slide, thank you, John. So taking some of these things into account, what do our monographs expenditures look like annually? I mentioned earlier that the library's material budget is $14.8 million. Out of our materials collections budget, we have spent roughly about like $2 million on our monographs across 6 fiscal years. It is also worth noting that special collections purchases are included in our expenditures, especially for the print book expenditures. And next slide. If we look at the same data in percentages and look at the monographs expenditures spent on print versus E and E platforms, you can tell in fiscal year 2021, due to the COVID shutdowns, we bought significantly less physical materials than ebooks. So for now, it seems our monograph spending is rebounding. For us, the COVID impact could be an outlier, since there was no choice but to move to online, because of the lack of access to our physical collections. And there will be some content that, cannot be delivered electronically. And remember, unlike many institutions, OSU did not stop collecting physical or print resources even during the shutdown. We actually kind of let things pile up in our warehouse. So we may be more of an anomaly, as it seems our monographs expenditures are reverting back to pre-pandemic times. So we'll really have to see how it progresses into the future. So let's skip this slide and go to questions. We've presented very different 3 perspectives, and we would also like to hear, from you what's been going on at your institutions, or any questions you may have for us.
Thanks, Moon. Okay, so we have 7-ish minutes. Questions? Thoughts, comments?
Hi, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. So at Oxford, you talked about prospective digitization. When you digitize those, are you continuing to do those as PDF, or are you starting to also do that as PDF and EPUBs for future digitization? I recognize that retrospective, you might keep them in PDF. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure, sorry. The question was, for our sort of ongoing digitization, are we going to be doing PDFs and EPUBs as well, rather than perhaps just PDFs for backlist? Our intention is to have all formats, again, not just for the third-party distribution to aggregator platforms, but also increasingly changing the way we deliver files off of our own platform. Right, John? Right? Yes. Thank
Sorry.
you.
Too many Johns.
Yeah, so, yeah, definitely looking in the direction of ebooks from our own platform.
Thank you.
I saw another hand. Question? Yeah.
Actually, a question for Moon. How did you bring in the EBA or DEIA programs? I know one university, the librarian has to approve when somebody requests a book. Did Ohio State do the same thing?
The question was, how did OSU rein in their DDA spending and whether or not there was sort of library mediated purchase at all as part of that?
Thank you for the question. So at OSU, we haven't really been doing mediation on our DDA, and one of the biggest changes to mediate our DDA spend was looking at the DDA data and determining what our threshold was for spending, and just kind of doing a lot of analysis around, okay, which direction can we go? Because, in 2020 we had to model different budget cut scenarios. So for us, the clearest signal was to redirect a lot of our DDA funds to an EBA because there was clear data telling us that our users were really interested in using or accessing Routledge content and a lot of Taylor and Francis imprints. So we ended up using our DDA data to make the shift to the EBA. So now we spend about $115,000 per year on the EBA. And that's kind of what we've done. Of course, we're looking at other potential avenues to redirect some of our funds. And I feel that the DDA data has been very helpful in helping us make those analyses. And quick shout out to Claire Eichmann. I don't know if Claire is in the room, but Claire is actually OSU's GOBI, Collection Development Liaison, and Claire really helped me kind of look through the data and see where the trends were too, because at OSU, our collections are so vast that sometimes we need a little bit more focus. So working with our colleagues and with vendors and publishers has been really helpful in doing that analysis too, because we can see the data from our system, but sometimes the vendors and the publishers can see different kinds of data that might be a little bit more granular. Thanks.
Thanks, Mo. I think maybe we have time for one more. Yeah.
So this is also a question for Moon, and you mentioned that your spending on print monographs was maybe starting to revert to you spending more than you were before. What's driving that? Is that user requests, or you redirected your funding, or how did that happen?
The question was sort of the underlying causes for the return of print purchasing.
And that's what I'm not really sure about. In terms of our allocations, we never really had a separate allocation for print versus e. So it's pretty much open to all formats. And we're just starting to kind of dig into what that might look like because, the fiscal year 2020 and 2021 were kind of odd for us because of the pandemic. And although it's been odd, it's given us a lot of opportunities to really review our data and try to see what's happening. And just looking at the most recent fiscal year that closed in June, we're noticing that our print spend is rebounding back to pre-pandemic levels. I know I ended up skipping through a lot of the user request things, but my colleagues in collection strategy, they've been looking at the type of user requests that come in that largely lead to firm orders. And one of the things we've noticed is in terms of format, at least with the user requests, we're noticing that the formats are split essentially half and half between ebooks and print. And the odd thing is we don't think it's due to a format preference, but rather the depending on the availability. So our users might want electronic, but because it's older content, we can only get it in print, or there's restrictions on licensing. So we may not be able to get something on streaming, for example. So we're still in the process of trying to understand what that means. So if other institutions have insights into what's going on at in your local situations, that would be really interesting to hear too.
All right, thanks, Moon. I think that means we are still evolving. And thank you all for coming.